I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that help us understand the law, how it's made, how it's broken, how it's enforced, how it was supposed to work and how it didn't work, and how we can make it better. At this particular time of the year, it's especially exciting to have this show. We've probably had 700 television shows, my producer Ron Bullock and me, but at election time there's a little more sting and bite because most people know it makes a difference. It makes a difference who represents us in Washington, and it makes a difference who represents us local, and it makes a difference who represents us in Madison. And most of us have learned that the hard way over the last 4 or 6 years. So I'm delighted that today's guest not only has an experience locally on the city council, mayor, but he's also been county executive, so he has a record that we can look at. And now he's running for the state senate, where the folks at the state senate have proved recently they can really change our lives without knowing us. Welcome, Mark Harris.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming. You're in the middle of an election. You're hardly a professional politician. I know a little bit about your background. You're a lawyer, a CPA, a banker, a businessman, and you have some experience in government. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I've actually got about 30 years in the private sector doing a variety of jobs, and I practice as a CPA in Michigan and Indiana, and as an attorney in Indiana, mostly a trust banker here in Wisconsin. But for the last 11 plus years, I've been the county executive of Winnebago County. So for that time, I've been a full-time politician.
Now you're a Democrat. You're running as a Democrat. You're not at all apologizing for being a Democrat.
No.
In fact, our last 3 or 4 guests on this show have all been Republicans. We're an equal opportunity abuser. But I have followed your career, and in many ways, you're a conservative. You're a conservative when it comes to money. It seems when we have Republican guests, they pretty much just want to talk about money. But you've got quite a record of lowering taxes. And what is your record on money?
Well, that's probably the accountant in me, but I like balanced budgets. I don't want to spend more than the revenue the government's raising. And my philosophy is if you're not willing to tax for something to pay for it, then you shouldn't spend it. So I've always proposed balanced budgets. The county actually at this point in time has a little bit lower tax rate than when I started 11 years ago. The total spending for the county is actually a little bit lower at this point in time than it was 11 years ago. But the accomplishment I'm really proud of is that the county's debt has been nearly cut in half over that time period. And that's really the way I've controlled the other two, the spending and the tax rate.
Well, that's important. I think it's something that we're all figuring out, that there just isn't enough money on the state level to take care of what we need in terms of the highways, the environment, the schools, and while the Constitution says we have to have a balanced budget so that every governor starts out with a balanced budget, at the end of the term they're short of money, so they have to steal it from somewhere. And you actually balance budgets.
I do, and I'm proud of that.
Well, you should be. But on the other side of the coin, when it comes to some of the human values, like education, for example, and the environment, for another example, you take a little more liberal view, don't you?
Well, I do. For instance, the county has a nursing home, and we cater to those individuals that would not have another place to go, people on medical assistance. We also take residents that have higher medical needs than what the other nursing homes are able to care for. And that's government's job, is to fill those niches that wouldn't otherwise be filled by the private sector.
Tell us a little bit more about our county nursing home that you had a big part in accomplishing for us.
Well, when I first became county executive, we were operating 2 very old nursing homes. They were not particularly efficient buildings, and all the food was prepared in one and then had to be moved to the other. And the the board was having a debate as to whether they should build a new nursing home, refurbish one of the other nursing homes, or get out of the nursing home business altogether. Well, the more I looked at it, the more I understood that your federal reimbursements include your depreciation and your interest expense. So that if we were to invest in a new nursing home, much of that would be paid for by the federal reimbursements. And there clearly was a need. There's people who are older and sicker when they first need a nursing home care, but their assets have been exhausted. And they would have nowhere else to go if the county didn't maintain a nursing home.
How recently has that nursing home for Winnebago County been completed?
You know, it's not that recent. We actually will be paying off the bonds on the nursing home within the next year.
Well, that's amazing. And how many people have beds out there?
It's about a 168 bed facility, and it's about 80% Medicare assistance.
And people should visit it. It's really an amazing place, I think. I think it's so impressive. Of course, at my age, I'm taking a different look at nursing homes than I did 20 years ago.
Yeah, we've worked very hard so that, you know, our residents tend to be older, sometimes sicker. We want those people to be able to live out their lives with dignity.
I think you've accomplished that. You had a lot of help, and it required your ability to work with people of the same party, different parties, different philosophies, and it kind of proves that leadership is something that's respected regardless of party.
Well, thank you.
Let's take our first break, Mark, and when we come back, I want to ask you some of your thoughts about the environment and water. Those are subjects that I have a personal interest in, and I know you do as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis, and my guest today is County Executive Mark Harris, who would like to go to Madison and represent us in the Senate. And that's quite a job. We've learned a lot over the last few years that none of us should sleep when the legislature's in session. It has done some amazing and some not very amusing things to our rights. It's affected the environment. It's affected the level of education. It's affected our universities, the K through 12 high schools. It's affected how much money is available for our children. It's attempted to take some of that money out of public education and give it to private education. And it has done a lot to the civil justice system that means your insurance policy is worth about 20% of what it was 6 years ago, and you didn't get a dime discount. But we're not here to talk about my issues. We're here to talk about the issues the voters are primarily concerned about, and one of them is water and the environment. Your thoughts, Mark?
Well, we're discovering that, you know, clean drinking water is an essential for life. And we're discovering that that's not as assured as we once thought it was. There's many parts of Wisconsin where the groundwater is contaminated by nitrates from fertilizer runoff or manure runoff. And we're discovering that even municipal water supplies might be clean and safe when they leave the water plant. But if your water comes to you through corroded lead pipes, you may be getting traces of lead in the water, and that's a very bad thing. Most people don't test their water except for when they sell their property. And I really think we ought to have more testing. And if people want state support in testing their well, the state should be willing to participate in that, because we need to know what the quality of the water is that people are drinking. And in this area, we've got some concentrations of naturally occurring arsenic. If high-capacity wells draw down the water table, that raises the arsenic in the groundwater.
Oh, I think this is incredibly important worldwide, as if we look at population problems throughout the world. It's related to water. We're fortunate here in Wisconsin that we're next to the Great Lakes. We've got another 15,000 lakes. We've got a lot of rivers, most of them relatively clean, but not so clean as they were before the Europeans came to improve things. And that is such an asset. Having this water and how we take care of it is a responsibility for many future generations. And you hit on a number of pet subjects with these large dairy farms. I live near one, and the people who own it are good friends of mine, but I'm a little nervous about the water every time somebody in our family gets sick. Go a little bit to the west, Washira County, where the lakes are disappearing because of all of the irrigation sucking out the water that belongs to all of us. And at the same time, our current state administration is saying we're powerless, we don't want to interfere. The private parties for manufacturing or agriculture can take the public's water. Well, I don't agree with that constitutionally. It's an issue for the people, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think the state really should have a comprehensive groundwater plan. But I also think they should help people to know whether they've got safe water by helping them with water testing if they request it. I also think some of the urban areas with older homes are going to need help to make sure that the water lines are not corroding and not adding lead to the water.
Well, additionally, we have to look at the role of the Department of Natural Resources. For a long time, under George Meyer is the most recent person, and he's going to be on the show shortly, it was managed by scientists. It was managed very well. It was an example for the other 49 states as to what a public trust you have in caring for your natural resources for future generations. Well, it became political. It became more political. Tommy Thompson can have credit for that. Then Governor Doyle said, well, if I get elected, I'll fix that. I'm going to take it away from being a political appointment. But he didn't. He, like many politicians, once they're elected, he suffered from amnesia. So it continued to be political. And right now, the DNR is the least effective I have ever seen it. They're not enforcing the current law. They're weakening the laws in terms of wetlands, for example, in terms of enforcing the law of docks and weed beds and water quality and reducing the level of the water. But this isn't my speech, it's yours. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there has been a change in the way they're being managed. And there may have been a time when we felt they were too tough in their protection of the environment, but now we're at just the opposite extreme where they're under pressure not to enforce their own rules, not to protect the waterways. And you need a better balance in their policies. But one of the things that's happened recently is that their authority to regulate high-capacity wells that pump over 100,000 gallons a day, has been taken away. And I don't know who protects the public when the DNR is had its teeth pulled.
Well, I'm a hunter and a dog trainer, and I'm being facetious, of course. In the last couple of years, the number of tickets to hunters for law violations in the DNR area has been cut in half. Have you noticed how much more ethically our hunters have become, including me? Or is it just a case we're shutting our eyes to the rules?
I think we're shutting our eyes to the rules, and I think we'll pay a price for that in the long run, and one that I don't think the public would want to pay.
And of course, a big issue is the public land. It isn't just for hunters and fishermen. It's for photographers. It's for picnickers. It's for the environment itself. It's for the wildlife. It's the picture of this particular state. And of course, we've got the same profiteers trying to get the administration, sure, with absolutely no resistance from the administration, to sell our public land to exploiters and people who are going to make millions of dollars on it.
It's funny how when some asset has been preserved over time for the public, we think, boy, they were smart to preserve that. But if you take a short-term perspective, there's always someone saying we could just sell that off and it would solve some problems in the short run. what's that long-term thinking that serves us better over the long haul?
Excellent point. We've run out of time for our second segment. It's going in a hurry. And we'll take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to be asking you about probably the most important subject, at least to me, and that's our education system. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mark Harris and I are talking about the election, the great state of Wisconsin, all the things we have going for us in this state, and questions as to whether they're being protected. I think our most valuable asset, even more than the lakes and the streams and the water and clean government, is our people, our young people that we're trying to educate. Your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, we've certainly changed our emphasis on education. We always prided ourselves in investing heavily in education and getting good results. But general school aids have declined quite a bit in recent years. Sometimes even when the schools get more money, their expenditure restraints are left unchanged, so the money can't be used for education, it has to be used to cut property taxes. The university system has taken an unconscionable cut, about $500 million over 2 years. And I have to think that over time, the quality of our education is going to suffer because of this underinvestment. And it's not wise. We know from data that investment in education is a good investment, one that returns dollars to the state.
Many people have left the teaching profession as a result of the current administration and their approach to that profession and their disrespect of that profession. That takes its toll on the quality of the education that is being provided to young people. Education is awfully expensive, and I would ask you where that money comes from.
Well, it comes from general purpose revenue from the state is where your money for your K through 12 schools, and a small slice of the university budget comes from there. Now, at one time, well, maybe 30 years ago, over 50% of the education expenses at the universities were picked up by the state, of the public universities. And now at UW-Oshkosh, the state's share is only about 16%. So there's been this enormous shift in who's paying, and that's been the primary driver of tuition on our college campuses.
And then, of course, we've got some concomitant problems, and that is qualified people are leaving the teaching profession in this state in droves. And then, of course, the other side of that coin is all these jobs we were promised didn't take place. Minnesota got them, Illinois got them, Michigan got them because of what was offered here in Wisconsin. So we educate people somewhat at public expense, and when they get through our universities that still aren't bad, they're not as good as they were, they leave the state to get a decent job.
Yeah, we do have a net out migration right now where more people leave the state than come into the state, and that's got long-term implications for the availability of workforce here, which actually can discourage business growth. But you touched on a lot of different things that are of concern to me. We want young people to stay here, and we need an environment that's attractive to them. If we're going to do that, I think we're underinvesting in that. And we really want startup businesses that are grown here. And our focus has been at attracting and expanding existing large businesses. That's important, but you can't ignore the startups because over time that's where the highest number of new jobs and new emerging fields comes from.
Well, I think that the job of being a senator that you want to be in Madison at this particular time is awfully important and is really going to impact the average citizen's life a lot more than who is president. And what are some of the issues that our voters can expect decisions to be made on in the next several years in Madison?
Well, there seems to be a pattern right now where the legislature seems to be willing to betray the public trust in favor of narrow-moneyed interests that can afford to write campaign checks. That's not the way to run the state. The state has to be run with the public's interest in mind. And I want us to get back to that. And that means investing more in the future of the institutions that benefit our middle class. It means that tax policy has to be balanced. That's an area where we've strayed terribly. That manufacturing tax cut is a near total tax cut for people whose income comes from manufacturing. And I know some manufacturers are wonderful people, but they didn't need a tax cut of 95% or more. And just some statistics on that. 3/4 of that tax cut goes to people with adjusted gross incomes over $1 million. And the top 11 recipients receive $22 million of tax benefit between them. It doesn't seem right to me.
Well, it doesn't seem right to anyone unless you're a manufacturer, I would think. So the burden gets a little heavier on middle-class working people with families, usually 2 incomes, and want to be able to get their youngsters into a competitive school so the youngsters have a chance. And they've already got too much burden.
Yes, and what's generally happened is these huge tax giveaways leave the state strapped for revenue, even though we've had a growing economy for the last several years. So they're giving the revenue growth away largely to very wealthy individuals that are politically connected. And then they don't have enough money left to fully support our public schools, our universities, to protect our environment. It's just the wrong priorities.
Mark, we're almost out of time. You have made a real case to represent us in Madison, partly by your speaking, but largely by your performing over the last several years. People can look at your record and see what you actually do, not what you say you'll do. But you have a minute left. Why don't you tell the folks why you think they should vote for Mark Harris?
Well, I think I've served them well as a county executive. I think I've been reasonable in my policies and sound financial planning for the county. I'm going to ask them for their vote in November, and I think my record as county executive gives you some insights of what I'll do as a state senator. Thank you.
I think so too. And thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, George. It was a great opportunity.
We'll be right back. You cannot escape the responsibility for tomorrow by evading it today. And that's what our administration in Madison has been doing for the past half dozen years. We have to face the fact that we do have a responsibility to our young people for education, to our elderly people for nursing care, to our environment, the assets of all of the people forever unless we waste them or destroy them or pollute them. We have to face these things today, and of course it costs money. While it isn't only about money, we have to be able to afford them. Mark Harris is a refreshing candidate in that he has been managing a county government successfully, getting us a new nursing home, state-of-the-art, and other services while actually reducing taxes, reducing the debt, and administrating government. Isn't that what we're looking for? I'm George Curtis.